What I want to talk a little bit about is this conversation we had a little earlier about herd mentality and some of the challenges that's caused for you and your business. Can you maybe give me an example of that?
Yeah, I think the one we talked about before the show is just a very vivid example is SVB. We had multiple term sheets on the back of our Series A for a venture debt, and we talked to like the masses in the crowd, and everyone was like, go with SVB. And maybe that was the right decision. Like in the end, it's actually looking like it's going to work out. We're going to keep our money there. They got a bridge bank, but man, that was not a fun Friday. It was not a fun weekend. And all of our money was tied up there because of the covenants that we have on our venture debt. So the whole reason we went with them was because of kind of that was the consensus, that was the belief. And my instinct actually kind of wanted to go with a different partner that we had a term sheet from, and I just kind of ignored it against the consensus. And that's one example. Another example is what we were just talking about in terms of launching early. I did not want to launch when we did. I did not want to. I didn't think it was the right move. There was a lot of good that came from it, to be clear. There was a lot of good that came from it, but I kind of got talked into it, and I felt like we needed more time in the container, and it put us on a very different path that in some ways was better and in some ways was worse. And I would say in a lot of ways I wasn't necessarily prepared for, since I kind of allowed myself to be, more or less convinced. Because as a founder, there's this difficult thing where you're trying to be like humble. You recognize you don't know everything. But then there's moments where you just get reinforced over and over again. Where you're like, I know a lot more than my investor here, this investor does. And in some ways, they know more than I do in other areas. But when it comes to my product, it comes to my business, when it comes to our strategy, like if anybody else knows that better than you do, you should try to learn as much as from them as you can, and then make your own decisions on first principles. But the last thing you want to do is outsource. Like another example of this is we raised the Series A. I was always against advisors. And then we got basically kind of like pressured into taking on an independent board seat because Tiger doesn't take board seats. And so we brought in, an advisor that was a really smart, talented person who worked at a really big company and gave us a lot of advice that was not very applicable for our business. And so then we followed that advice kind of blindly, and we spent a lot of money in areas that were just like literally $0 in ROI. Like it just made no sense for our business because it was a playbook that was applied to that someone else had. I tried to be like, oh, I'll learn from other people. I don't want to, be a know-it-all. But it was also kind of against my instincts of what I did. And every single time that I like end up outsourcing the thinking, which happens a lot, frankly, when you're a founder, when you're tired, when you're exhausted and you're just like, man, I can't, I'm just like, every day I'm just waking up and just trying to like slog through it till the next day. And that's when you have to be really, really careful about outsourcing your thinking, because you're going to pay the consequence of the decision, because whoever told you doesn't have any accountability. They just have their playbook. And if you, try to be like, oh, I don't know anything. This person knows something. And let's just do what they say. It's going to be the wrong call most of the time, and especially over your instincts. And then second of all, you're the one who's accountable over it. So you might as well go with what you think is best and that you have control over, because it's also really, really frustrating and energy draining when you've made a decision or you've gone down a path that you weren't super excited about or you weren't aligned with. And then it turns out to be the wrong path. And now you've got to spend all of the energy to kind of like undo it, all while like, begrudgingly, feeling like, man, I should have just trusted my own instincts. So that's kind of like, I guess my big takeaway, over. And I didn't really have that takeaway when I was a co-founder twice. It's really more has been when that's the CEO. There's a difference between like being responsible for, the curriculum, the programming technology, like I was at Mission U, and being responsible for the whole business and the cap table and the people inside of it. And it's really overwhelming. It really is. And it's something I have to be very vigilant on of being, really rigorous and making sure that I'm not outsourcing that thinking, because you, as a CEO or as a founder, you can't outsource that accountability, and you're going to pay the consequence no matter, whether it was good advice or not.